We talked earlier with an analyst about what is happening in Georgia. This is a very worrying situation because you've got effectively, I mean, I'm being slightly crude here, but you've got effectively a government that's hijacked, or a party that's hijacked government completely out of step with the wishes of the population.
Well, it's not entirely out of step with the wishes of the population because there are large parts of the country which did vote for the Georgian Dream Party, which is the ruling party that has set the police against the massive demonstrations in the capital, Tbilisi. So what you've got in Georgia is what we're seeing in so many parts of the world of a hopelessly polarized society and one party seizing control because by all objective accounts we had these elections in Georgia were not free and fair, seizing control and using the mechanisms of state and the state's monopoly on violence against legitimate political protesters. So this is deeply worrying for Georgians above all. But of course, it's also a reflection of Russia's determination to continue to exert influence over those countries on its borders, most spectacularly, of course, in Ukraine, but also in countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan. I have to say that Russia is much less able to do so than it has been in the past. But Georgia is a very, very important example of
Yeah,
where it's succeeding.
absolutely, and where it will see it in its total self-interest is where it should put its effort. But let's talk about sort of Russia's influence and its impact perhaps on the EU, because I think this is obviously beginning to crystallize significantly. First of all, let's talk about Russia itself, and obviously the war in Ukraine, the loss, effectively, if I can put it that way, of Syria, the rise in power and influence of Erdogan in Turkey on the back of that. How much kind of fuel in the tank does Russia still have next year in terms of how it's going to exercise its geopolitical ambitions?
Well, it's been an ambivalent year, and particularly an ambivalent end of the year for Vladimir Putin. People are assuming that Trump's election in the United States is going to be of assistance to Putin, although a lot of people point out that none of us really know what Trump is going to do about Russia, Ukraine, or indeed any other major foreign policy issue until he actually gets into office. Domestically, the strain on the Russian economy is really now beginning to tell. The ruble is losing value quite rapidly and broke through the psychologically important 100 rubles to the dollar earlier this month, and people are exhausted. At the same time, this war of attrition, which now of course includes several thousand North Korean troops who have been deployed on Russia's behalf by Kim Jong-un. At the same time, Ukraine's loss of frontline soldiers and territory is accelerating, and Ukraine has a real problem trying to keep the front line coherent and avoid Russia particularly overrunning the Donbass. So Putin has some cards still in his hands. The big unknown, of course, is how the Trump administration and its newly appointed envoy on Russia, Ukraine, Kellogg, is going to approach this issue. But he's not looking fabulously strong, Putin. But there is at the moment no alternative emerging as a possible rival to him.
Can you briefly give me your analysis of how the EU is going to hold this together next year? Because if you've got a sort of Russian president with his back to the wall, but you've also got countries like Hungary under Orban, now I gather Slovakia as well, effectively overtly pro-Russian, visiting the Russian president, even financially supporting the Russian president in direct contradiction of the EU's policy stance. This will surely reach a crisis point next year.
I think it will reach a crisis point. Along with Slovakia and Hungary, in October you will have elections in Czechia, and that's almost certain to see the return of the Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, who is also taking a Fico-Orban line on Russia. At the same time, there's a possibility, if current coalition negotiations break down, that in Austria you will have a far-right leader, Herbert Kickl of the Freedom Party, and then you start to see the emergence of a central bloc of pro-Russian right-wing parties in Central Europe. But above all else, we're now waiting in February for the German elections and to see the performance of the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, who at the moment sitting second in the polls. Now, this is a extreme right wing, some would argue a fascist party. And the idea of a fascist or extreme right-wing party becoming second in federal elections in Germany is really giving quite a lot of people the shivers. So underneath this, there is this debate across Europe. Should we be supporting Ukraine? Shouldn't this money be going on our own citizens? There's a lot of that talk.
Does this all head
across the
towards
country.
effectively a frozen conflict in Ukraine, or does it go further in terms of what countries like Hungary want to see? It doesn't go towards a kind of Eastern European Brexit or anything like that.
No, it's certainly not going to lead to an East European Brexit, partly because the East Europeans, like everyone else in Europe, have seen what an absolute mess Brexit is for the United Kingdom. The dismantling of 40 years of regulatory alignment leads to chaos. So instead, those people who were supporting Hungary's exit or France's exit, Frexit, for example, they've all switched their position, and their position is now is to stay in Europe and to actually change Europe in their image, as it were, or according to their ideological precepts. So you've got a shift in those terms, but the centre is continuing to look weak, and Germany has been gazing at its navel all this year. But within that navel gazing, the issue of Ukraine is central. Now, will Russia-Ukraine be a frozen conflict? Well, there are a couple of difficult circles to square here. Above all else, Ukraine wants credible guarantees if there is to be a freezing of the front line of its security in the future. It wants NATO membership. As far as NATO is concerned, that's not going to happen. So instead, they're even now talking about the deployment of European troops, French troops, possibly British troops, possibly troops from Poland, on the front line to guarantee Ukraine's security. Now, that may freeze what's going on in the Russo-Ukrainian war, but it brings us closer towards a potential confrontation with Russia. So there are no easy options out of this war, even though both parties are looking increasingly exhausted.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Misha. Glenny, the journalist and expert on Eastern Europe. Thank you for coming on and talking about what next year might hold for the European Union and indeed Ukraine. Controversy, that is in Georgia, of course. Georgia has sworn in their new president. He's the former pro footballer Mikhail Kavelashvili, who used to play for Manchester City. He's allied with the ruling Georgian Dream Party. Nevertheless, thousands of people continue to protest in the capital of Tbilisi because of allegations of parliamentary fraud. In fact, the outgoing president has called the inauguration a parody, and Georgia's four main opposition groups indeed have rejected the outcome. Vazha Tavberidze is a journalist and political analyst and a staff writer at Radio Free Europe. Welcome to the show, Vazha.
Happy to be here. Hello.
Can you tell us what's happening in Georgia this morning? Obviously, the new president has been sworn in, and there are many people on the streets who regard him as illegitimate.
I can, but before that, I was listening to the previous guest, and I must admit I caught myself thinking, "Wish we had your problems."
Yes,
Uh,
that is a
yeah,
fair point. It's worth
yeah.
reminding ourselves about that.
So, what we are now seeing in Tbilisi is obviously yet another chapter of this very protracted political crisis. We have the president at one side, as you pointed out, then another president, and neither seem to be very keen on each other. The predecessor, Salome Zourabichvili, does not consider him legitimate. She said that as much during her press conference, which coincided with the inauguration. She said she's vacating the palace, and there was this speculation about the palace, whether she would vacate it or not. But there was this looming threat that she might be arrested if she doesn't go. The prime minister said, if I think I quote him correctly, she has a choice to either watch it behind the bars or outside them. So she vacated the palace, said that it's merely a symbolic building, said that she is going to the streets with the protesters, and also reaffirmed that she does not consider the new president legitimate, doesn't consider the government legitimate, that she sees herself as president still, and that leads us into quite uncertain realm where the government will have to tolerate her being president after her term has been up.
Tell us,
Yeah,
tell
go
us
ahead.
what's going to happen, because the Georgian Dream Party is the party that is close to Russia, and yet it seems to
That's
me,
widely the perception, yes.
and it seems to me that hundreds of thousands of Georgians would like Georgia to join the European Union. This is an irrevocable rift. Am I right in saying that popular opinion is pro-EU rather than pro-Russia?
Absolutely, overwhelmingly so. It's even enshrined in the constitution that any Georgian government has to pursue the path towards the deeper Euro-Atlantic integration, and the government has seen to have turned its back on that, have done massive turn and basically aligned itself with Moscow. And the president is basically the new president is also seeing as another piece in this game. He already mentioned his previous career as a footballer. We call him a Mancunian candidate here, and yeah, and it's the context is important here because the Georgian Dream and the billionaire Vladimir Ivanishvili, which is the mastermind and founder of the party, they've have been twice burned already. They handpicked two presidents, Georgi Margvelashvili and Salome Zourabichvili, only for both of them to become fierce critics of the regime. And this time they've opted for what many are seeing as some sort of Caligula's horse appointment, selecting someone whose only leading qualification is unquestionable obedience and loyalty. And the new president is also interesting how he's planning to improve relations with the West, because he was noted for his fiery-mouthed, foul-mouthed, one might say, anti-Western rhetoric, very keen to get in brawls in parliament, etc. So it's complete chaos and very hard to predict what's going to happen. But one thing that's certain is that both of the presidents will try to win legitimacy in the eyes of international community, so to say. Zourabichvili can probably, count on the support of French President Macron, to whom she's very close to, the Baltic countries, Poland, and Kavaliashvili probably, and the Georgian government at large will look to allies such as Viktor Orban, Erdogan, Lukashenko, Aliyev, and so on. The broader picture, however, stays very much the same. It's a country at the crossroads, and people understand that geopolitical fate is now being decided, that either we continue moving towards Europe, maybe stumbling sometimes, maybe making baby steps, or the other option is to remain skulking in Kremlin's backyard, so to say.
Thank you so much, Vazha Tavberidze, for that excellent analysis of what is happening in Georgia following the swearing in of the new president today. As you said, Georgia is at a crossroads and it's impossible to say what is likely to happen.